Welcome to another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be tackling something that might sound pretty straightforward at first glance, the idea of knowability.
Hmm.
This is this intriguing notion that any truth,
Right.
if it's genuinely true,
Yeah.
must be knowable
Okay.
by someone,
Uh-huh.
somewhere, at some point in time.
Yeah.
But, as you'll soon discover, this seemingly simple idea leads to some seriously mind-bending consequences
Absolutely.
when we apply a bit of logic.
You're absolutely right. This knowability principle, as it's called, has been a central theme in various philosophical discussions for centuries. For instance, think about semantic anti-realism. This viewpoint suggests that truth is intrinsically linked to our ability to verify it. If something can't be verified even in theory, then it becomes meaningless to even talk about its truth.
So are we saying that if a claim can't be tested or proven, it's essentially not worth considering?
In essence, yes. And there are other examples too. Mathematical constructivists believe that a mathematical statement only holds true if we can demonstrate its validity through a constructive proof. Similarly, internal realists posit that truth is what we would all agree upon if we had perfect knowledge.
It seems like these different philosophical stances are all trying to ground truth in something concrete and accessible, something we can grasp rather than some abstract, unreachable realm.
Precisely. And that's where Fitch's paradox comes in and throws a wrench into the works.
This is where things start to get really interesting.
Right.
So tell me, how can a logic problem challenge this seemingly intuitive idea that truth and knowability go hand in hand?
Well, Fitch's paradox demonstrates that if we fully embrace the knowability principle, the idea that all truths are knowable,
Okay.
we're forced to accept a rather shocking conclusion that every single truth is already known.
Wait, hold on a second. Are we saying that someone somewhere already possesses all knowledge?
Yeah.
That seems a bit far-fetched, wouldn't you say?
It does sound pretty outlandish, right?
Yeah.
But that's exactly where the logic of Fitch's paradox takes us. And to fully understand how we arrive at this bewildering outcome, we need to break down the paradox step by step.
Let's do that. I'm all ears. Take us through the intricacies of this paradox.
The crux of Fitch's paradox lies in two fundamental assumptions. Firstly, it relies on the knowability principle itself, the belief that all truths are knowable. Right. Secondly, it acknowledges the fact that we are not omniscient, we don't know everything.
It's safe to say that there are still plenty of mysteries out there in the universe and even within ourselves that we haven't figured out. So that second assumption seems pretty solid.
Absolutely. And it's precisely this gap between what's potentially knowable, all truths, and our actual knowledge, which is limited, that fuels the paradox.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this might lead to some complications. Let's delve into the logical structure of the paradox itself.
Okay.
How does Fitch actually go about proving this seemingly absurd conclusion?
To make things a bit more formal, we can express the knowability principle using logical notation. Looks like this.
AP, PEP.
Whoa, hold on there. Let's break that down for those of us who don't speak fluent logic symbols. What exactly does that cryptic formula mean?
Of course. In plain English, it means this. For any proposition P, if Q is true, then it is possible to know P. The term means for all. P represents any statement or proposition. The arrow implies the diamond symbol signifies it is possible that, and KP means P is known.
So it's basically a fancy way of stating that for every truth represented by P,
Yes.
there's a potential for someone to know it.
Exactly. And, at first glance, this principle appears quite intuitive.
Yeah.
It aligns with our desire for truth to be objective and discoverable.
Right.
We like to think that if something is true, there must be a way to figure it out, right?
Right. It feels like a core principle of the scientific method as well. We formulate hypotheses, and if they hold true, we believe there must be a way to test and verify them. Precisely. But here's where Fitch's paradox throws a curveball and challenges this seemingly intuitive notion.
All right, I'm hooked. Let's break down how this paradox actually works its magic. How do we go from all truths are knowable to the outlandish claim that all truths are already known?
Fitch's paradox hinges on the tension between those two key assumptions we discussed, the knowability principle and the fact that we are not all-knowing.
Right, because we can all agree that there are things we simply don't know.
Yeah.
Just consider the mysteries of the cosmos or the inner workings of our own minds.
Exactly. And it's within this gap between what is potentially knowable and what we currently know that the paradox gains its momentum.
Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the logic here. Walk me through it carefully, step by step.
Imagine there's a truth, let's call it P, that is not currently known to anyone.
Okay.
This aligns with our assumption that we aren't omniscient.
So P could be anything from a complex scientific truth to something as mundane as like, there's a cat napping under my desk right now,
Yeah.
as long as no one is currently aware of it.
Exactly. Now, according to the knowability principle, if P is indeed true, then it must be possible for someone to know it.
That makes sense. Just because we don't know it right now doesn't mean it can't be known in the future.
Precisely. But here's where things take a turn.
Okay.
Knowing P and knowing that P is not known are two distinct pieces of knowledge.
Okay.
To know the statement, P and P is not known, you need to know both parts of that statement.
So it's like saying you can't claim to know a whole sentence if you only understand half the words. You need to grasp the entire statement to truly know it.
Exactly. And here's the crucial point. If you truly know something, it must be true.
Right.
That's a fundamental principle of knowledge. You can't know something that's false.
So you can't say you know the sky is green because that statement is simply not true.
Precisely. Now let's apply this principle to the statement, P and P is not known.
Okay.
If we focus on the second part of the statement, P is not known,
Right.
and assume someone knows this to be true, we encounter a contradiction.
Because if you know that P is not known, then P must be known, right?
Yes.
It seems like we've stumbled upon a self-contradiction here.
Exactly. The very act of knowing that P is not known makes it impossible for P to actually be unknown. It creates a logical paradox.
So this means it's inherently impossible for anyone to know the entire statement, P and P is not known, even though the knowability principle suggests that any truth is knowable.
You've got it. And this creates a direct conflict with the knowability principle itself.
It seems like we've hit a snag in our logical journey.
Yes.
Where do we go from here?
We'll dive into that and explore the truly mind-blowing conclusion of Fitch's paradox in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Stay tuned. Welcome back. Last we left off, we'd just hit a snag in our exploration of Fitch's paradox.
Right, we were trying to wrap our heads around how this paradox challenges the idea that all truths are knowable.
Exactly. By assuming a truth that nobody knows, we ran into a contradiction when we tried to say that someone could know P and P is not known.
It's like the very act of knowing that something is unknown makes it known. It twisted my brain into a knot.
A delightful knot. And because this creates a logical contradiction, it means we have to re-examine our starting assumptions. Remember, those were the knowability principle itself,
Right.
and the idea that we are not omniscient.
So does this mean we have to throw out the knowability principle entirely?
Well,
Or are we all secretly all-knowing, which seems even more unlikely?
well, that's the surprising conclusion Fitch's paradox leads us to. If we want to hold on to the knowability principle, we have to accept that all truths must already be known.
Whoa. So are we saying that somewhere out there someone has a complete knowledge of everything?
Yeah.
From the smallest subatomic particle to the grandest cosmic mysteries. That's a pretty wild thought.
It is, and it certainly clashes with our everyday experience. We constantly encounter new information, grapple with unsolved problems, and admit that there's so much we don't know both individually and collectively. So this paradox really forces us to reconsider what we mean by knowability and how it relates to truth.
This is really making me think. It's like saying that because someone could potentially discover a cure for the common cold, it means the cure already exists somewhere, even if we haven't found it yet. It feels like a bit of a logical leap.
That's a great analogy, and that's the beauty of paradoxes like this. They highlight potential flaws in our reasoning and push us to confront the limits of our understanding.
So if this paradox is such a serious challenge to the knowability principle, how do philosophers respond to it? Do they just throw their hands up and abandon the whole idea of knowability?
Philosophers love a good puzzle. So they've come up with various ways to try to reconcile this paradox with our understanding of truth and knowledge.
Okay, let's dive into some of those escape routes. Where do we even begin to unravel this knotty paradox?
There are a few main strategies philosophers have employed. One approach involves questioning the logic itself. Some argue that the paradox only arises if we're operating within classical logic, the kind of logic we typically use.
Right.
But what if there are other systems of logic that might help us sidestep this problem?
Different types of logic.
Yeah.
That sounds intriguing. Are we talking about bending the rules of reasoning here?
In a way, yes. Different logical systems have different rules for how we draw conclusions from given premises.
Okay.
Classical logic, the one we're most familiar with, relies on principles like the law of excluded middle, which states that a proposition must be either true or false,
Right.
and the law of non-contradiction, which says that a statement and its negation can't both be true at the same time.
Okay, those sound like pretty fundamental principles of logic. So what do these alternative logics propose?
One alternative is intuitionistic logic, which challenges the law of excluded middle. It doesn't assume that every proposition has to be definitively true or false, especially when we're dealing with concepts that haven't been proven or fully constructed yet.
So intuitionistic logic is more open to the possibility of unknowns and things that are still in a state of flux. That seems like it could potentially help us escape this knowability paradox.
Exactly. By allowing for more nuanced possibilities beyond a simple true-false dichotomy, intuitionistic logic might provide a way to resolve the paradox without having to accept the conclusion that all truths are already known.
So tweaking the underlying logic is one potential avenue. What other strategies do philosophers propose?
Another approach involves placing restrictions on the types of truths that the knowability principle applies to. This is known as the restriction strategy.
Okay.
Instead of saying all truths are knowable, we might narrow the scope to certain kinds of truths.
So instead of making a blanket statement about knowability, we get more specific about what kinds of truths we're talking about.
Precisely. For instance, some philosophers propose limiting the knowability principle to Cartesian statements. These are statements that can be known with certainty without leading to any contradictions.
Yeah, so we filter out those tricky statements like P and P is not known that create the paradox in the first place. It's like we're surgically removing the problem area.
Exactly. Another restriction strategy focuses on basic statements as the foundation of knowability.
Okay.
These are simple, fundamental truths that can then be combined to form more complex ones.
It's like building a house. You need solid bricks to create a stable structure.
Right.
You can't just start putting up walls without a good foundation.
That's a great analogy. The idea here is that if we can establish the knowability of these basic truths, then perhaps we can build upon them to understand the knowability of more complex, derived truths.
Okay, so we've got logical revisions and restrictions on the types of truths covered. It seems like philosophers are pulling out all the stops to grapple with this paradox. Are there any other strategies we should be aware of?
There is another intriguing approach that delves into the modal logic at the heart of Fitch's proof.
Okay.
Some philosophers suggest that the paradox arises from a subtle misunderstanding of how we substitute statements into modal contexts specifically, confusing rigid and non-rigid designators.
Modal logic, rigid and non-rigid designators. This sounds pretty technical. Can you unpack that for us in a way that even a philosophy novice can understand?
Absolutely. A rigid designator is a term that always refers to the same thing regardless of the context.
Okay.
Like your name will always refer to you even if we're talking about you in a hypothetical scenario or a different point in time.
Like my name will always refer to me, even if we're talking about me in a hypothetical scenario or at a different point in time.
Exactly. But non-rigid designators can refer to different things depending on the context.
So like the phrase, the tallest person in the room, would refer to a different person depending on which room we're talking about.
Precisely. Now, some philosophers argue that Fitch's paradox arises from mistakenly treating certain non-rigid designators as if they were rigid, leading to a logical error.
So it's like using the wrong tool for the job, trying to hammer in a nail with a wrench instead of a hammer.
That's a great way to put it. They argue that by carefully analyzing the modal logic involved and making sure we're using the right kind of designators, we can potentially avoid the paradoxical conclusion that all truths are already known.
Wow, so we've got a whole toolbox of strategies for approaching this paradox. We can tweak the logic, restrict the knowability principle, or dive deep into the modal mechanics of Fitch's proof.
And it's important to remember that there isn't one universally accepted solution.
Right.
Philosophers are still debating the best way to address Fitch's paradox, which is part of what makes it so captivating.
It's definitely sparked my curiosity. This seemingly simple idea about knowability has taken us on a fascinating journey through different logical systems, the nature of truth, and the limits of our knowledge.
Absolutely. And it highlights how even our most basic assumptions about what we can know can lead to complex and thought-provoking puzzles. But we're not quite done yet. There are a few lingering questions and interpretations we should touch on before we wrap up our deep dive. Stay tuned for the final part of our exploration of Fitch's paradox.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into Fitch's paradox. I have to admit, my brain is still kind of swirling from trying to wrap itself around all these different interpretations and potential solutions.
It's a paradox that definitely keeps you thinking, and that's what makes it so valuable. It forces us to examine the very foundations of how we understand truth and knowledge.
It certainly has. So before we wrap up, are there any other lingering questions or interpretations of Fitch's paradox that we should explore? I'm curious to see what other insights we might uncover.
There are a few key points that continue to be debated. For example, even if we accept that Fitch's paradox successfully challenges the knowability principle in its most general form, that all truths are knowable, it doesn't necessarily mean we have to completely abandon the idea that truth and knowability are somehow connected.
So there might be a more nuanced way to understand the relationship between truth and knowability.
Exactly. Some philosophers argue that the paradox might simply expose limitations in our current understanding of knowledge, or perhaps the scope of what we consider knowable. Maybe there are categories of truths that are simply beyond our current capacity to know, but that doesn't mean they're inherently unknowable.
Mm.
It could be that we just haven't developed the tools, methods, or conceptual frameworks to grasp them yet.
That's a thought-provoking perspective.
Uh-huh.
So it's not necessarily about knowing everything, but recognizing that there might be boundaries to what we can know at a given time or with our current methods. It's like we're constantly pushing the boundaries of what's knowable as we expand our understanding of the universe and ourselves.
That's a great way to put it. And this opens up a whole new set of questions. If there are truths that are currently beyond our grasp, what does it even mean for them to be true?
Right.
How can something be true if we can't, even in principle, know it? These are questions that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries.
Wow, those are deep questions that lead us right to the edge of the knowable and perhaps even beyond. Are we venturing into the realm of the philosophical unknown here?
Perhaps it forces us to grapple with the relationship between truth and knowledge, and whether truth can exist independently of our ability to comprehend it. Does something need to be knowable to be true? Or can truth exist in a realm that's completely inaccessible to us?
It's fascinating how this seemingly simple logic puzzle has opened up such profound philosophical questions. It really makes you question your assumptions about what we can know and how we know it.
Absolutely. And that's the power of philosophy. To challenge our assumptions, push the boundaries of our thinking, and make us consider new possibilities.
This deep dive has certainly given me a lot to ponder. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on the nature of truth and knowledge.
It's been my pleasure to guide you through the intricate twists and turns of Fitch's paradox. And for our listeners who are eager to explore this topic further, we've included links to some excellent resources in the show notes, including the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article on Fitch's paradox.
Yes, definitely check those out if you want to delve deeper into this fascinating philosophical puzzle. And as we conclude our deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question to ponder. If we can't know everything, what does it mean for something to be true?
Keep those minds questioning and those truth-seeking spirits burning bright. Until next time.